The African Export-Import Bank has been active in the capital market. It's managed to raise $460 million plus in its inaugural issue of a samurai bond. Essentially, that's raising debt in yen in Japan. Now, the move makes the bank one of only a handful, really, of African institutions to raise funds in the Japanese market. The samurai bond in question is in 5 tranches, a 2-year, 3-year, 5-year, 7-year and a 10-year. All of them are fixed-rate notes, alongside a $90.6 million 3-year fixed-rate samurai bond aimed at the retail market. According to the bank, the institutional samurai transaction attracted over 150 orders, which is higher than any other debut samurai transactions issued by African institutions. All right, then we've spoken a fair bit about Afriexim Bank raising a fair bit of debt on the capital markets, but let's explore what's happening on the trade side here in Africa, which is a main focus for Afriexim Bank. Gainmore Zanamwe is a senior manager in charge of trade facilitation at the Africa Export-Import Bank, is joining us now live on the program. Gainmore, thank you for your time. So there's an interesting report that the bank put out not too long ago, essentially pointing out that economies in Southern Africa account for the bulk of trade within the continent. According to this report, what are members of the Southern African Customs Union or SADC doing right that other regional blocs should emulate?
Well, thank you very much. Yes, Gainmore Zanamwe is my name. I'm the director responsible for trade facilitation and investment promotion at the African Export-Import Bank. And you are right. I think the SADC region is actually leading in the context of intra-regional trade as well as intra-African trade. What is actually key for SADC is that they have actually prioritized industrialization, and they've taken a number of measures that they are implementing to facilitate the development of regional value chains. And this is actually at the heart of the things that SADC is doing, of course, led by the powerhouse, South Africa. South Africa has always been leading in terms of intra-African trade, but they are now working with other countries in SADC to try and promote value chains in the agricultural space, especially the boosting of production of agricultural products and processing them. They have also prioritized the beneficiation of the minerals. You all know that SADC is one of the regions that has got rich in minerals all the way from platinum to cobalt in DRC, etc. So there are concerted efforts to actually beneficiate those raw materials, and the bank is also working directly with Zambia and DRC. They both belong to SADC, to actually assist them to add value to their raw materials and manufacture battery,
to what extent, though?
Electric vehicle.
To what extent, though, are specific problems around logistics, taxes, and customs, right? Because those tend to be the 3 key impediments that we often see when you talk to businesses and just moving goods from point A to point B in Africa. To what extent is SADC doing a much better job in that space, rather compared to, say, ECOWAS or the East African Community?
Yes, it's a very good question. I think logistics, especially transport logistics, is one of the major challenges that is actually affecting doing business, moving goods within the SADC region. But SADC is doing a bit better because the infrastructure there is fairly developed when you compare it to other countries. And when it comes to, if you compare to other regions, you'll realize that there are not as much roadblocks that you find in the probably north-south corridor. And even though it requires probably the railway to be rehabilitated, there's a project that is going on that is being spearheaded by SADC to actually fix the rail, but the road is pretty much in good shape. Afriexim Bank, working with some other South African banks, actually managed to rehabilitate the Beit Bridge border post, and it was actually a very interesting exercise that led to some efficiencies that allowed goods to move all the way from South Africa to Zimbabwe and then to Zambia all the way to DRC. Whilst there are still some challenges, I think in terms of customs and taxes, I think in general, the SADC region has actually done very well in terms of reducing the import duties and dealing with some of the customs administrative procedures.
Right.
The bank is also working with SADC to try and bring some efficiencies by implementing a transit guarantee scheme, which we are planning to deploy very soon, which should actually ensure that a truck can move all the way from South Africa via Zimbabwe, Zambia, without stopping to post transit bonds. So we've got a number of measures that we're actually going to implement to support SADC, and we'll extend those to the rest of the continent under the African Continental Free Trade Agreement.
One last question for you, because we are running short of time here. The bank is also forecasting intra-African trade growth of less than 1% for next year. What exactly is explaining that sluggish growth forecast in trading among economies on the continent? Is it because in some instances we're trading lots of the same primary commodities? We've got maize being grown, for example, in Zambia, Zimbabwe, Malawi, Kenya. Or are there other limiting factors that come into play? Expensive and unavailable credit, high logistics costs that better explain that slow rate of growth?
Well, aside from the logistics challenges, I think you probably know that we are basically coming out of COVID. Some countries are still recovering. There was also drought, and some of the countries were also affected by the Ukraine-Russia crisis. But what is really interesting is that Africa has been able to show resilience due to the fact that the African countries are now working together under the AFCFTA, and we've actually seen the AFCFTA catalyzing and boosting some intra-African trade. They've been just probably the sluggish growth that you alluded to, but we believe that with the measures that we are implementing at Afriexim Bank, that should actually assist to boost intra-African trade. We've got a range of initiatives like the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System that is going to facilitate payment in local currencies, and that will actually cut a lot of costs. We also have the intra-African trade fair that we have been implementing since 2018, and the next edition will be taking place in Algeria from 4 to 10 September. And it's going to be a major boost in intra-African trade. We are looking at deals worth more than $44 billion. In 2023, we did $43 billion. So we believe that that is going to be a key factor in boosting intra-African trade going forward, because the intra-African trade will bridge the gap in terms of market intelligence, and it will actually support the production of value-added products as opposed to raw materials that are currently being exported.